I called her husband after 5 months of dating her, thinking he'd confirm their separation. What he told me about their marriage counseling destroyed everything she'd been building.
Hey there, I'm Violet. I know exactly what you're thinking right now, and trust me, I've had this conversation with myself about 1,000 times. But here's the thing, life isn't as black and white as everyone pretends it is, you know? Jeff and I had been separated for 5 months when I met Derek. 5 months of living in different apartments, sleeping in different beds, trying to figure out if 12 years of marriage was worth salvaging or if we should just call it quits. The thing is, we never actually filed the papers. I mean, we talked about it constantly, but there's this huge difference between talking about divorce and actually walking into a lawyer's office and making it real. Our therapist kept saying we needed space to think, that rushing into legal proceedings while we were both emotional wasn't smart. So we did this weird limbo thing where we'd meet every other week for couples therapy, trying to work through our issues, but we were technically separated, technically living apart, technically figuring things out. I started thinking about dating around month 3. Not seriously at first, just wondering what it would feel like to have coffee with someone new, someone who didn't know about all the fights Jeff and I had about money and kids and his mother. Someone who didn't immediately bring up that time I forgot to pay the electric bill or how I never load the dishwasher the right way. My friend Sarah kept telling me I should get on the apps. She said I needed to remember who I was outside of being Jeff's wife, that I'd lost myself somewhere in all those years of compromise and couple dynamics. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. I couldn't remember the last time someone looked at me like I was interesting, like they wanted to know what I thought about things. So I downloaded Bumble, just to see what was out there, you know. I told myself it was research, like window shopping. I wasn't going to actually meet anyone. But then Derek messaged me, and his profile was so different from Jeff's whole vibe. Where Jeff was all suited up and serious in his photos, Derek had pictures of himself working on some electrical project, grinning with these crinkles around his eyes, looking like he actually enjoyed his life. We started texting, and I found myself looking forward to his messages in this way I hadn't felt in years. He'd send me pictures of weird stuff he found on job sites, ask me about the advocacy work I do at the NGO, actually listen when I complained about my boss. It felt so easy, so uncomplicated. When he asked me out, I said yes without even thinking about it. I mean, Jeff and I were separated. We were in therapy trying to figure things out, but we weren't together. I wasn't cheating, technically. I was just keeping my options open while we worked on our marriage. That's what separation is for, right? To see if you want to stay married, or if there's something better out there. I convinced myself it was actually healthy. Like, how could I make a real decision about Jeff if I didn't know what else was possible? Maybe dating Derek would help me realize that Jeff and I were meant to be together. Or maybe it would show me that I'd outgrown our marriage and needed to move on. Either way, I was gathering information to make the best choice for everyone involved. The first date with Derek was at this little Italian place downtown. He showed up 5 minutes early, opened doors, asked real questions about my work. When I told him about the clean water project we're running in Guatemala, he didn't just nod politely like Jeff always did. He wanted to know specifics about the engineering challenges, about how we measure impact, about what it felt like to see communities get access to clean water for the first time. That's when I started compartmentalizing everything. Derek became my Thursday evening and Sunday afternoon person. Jeff remained my Tuesday therapy appointment and occasional Saturday coffee person. I kept them in completely separate mental boxes, and honestly, it worked. For a while, it really worked. I told Derek I was recently out of a long relationship but ready to date again. Which was true, technically. I just didn't mention that the long relationship wasn't technically over yet.
Hey, this is Derek. I thought I'd hit the jackpot with Violet. After 2 years of dating apps and first dates that went nowhere, here was this woman who actually had her shit together. NGO worker, passionate about her job, could hold a real conversation about something other than her ex-boyfriend or her Instagram followers. I'm 35, you know. I've been through enough relationships to recognize the red flags early. The women who can't make decisions, who create drama for attention, who treat dating like some kind of competitive sport. Violet wasn't like that. She seemed stable, grounded, like she knew who she was and what she wanted. We fell into this easy routine pretty quickly. I'd pick her up Thursday evenings, we'd grab dinner or see a movie, sometimes just walk around the city talking about everything and nothing. Sundays became our thing too. I'd come over to her apartment, we'd cook breakfast together, spend the afternoon reading the paper or working on small projects around her place. The sex was incredible too. Not just the physical part, though that was amazing. It was the way she'd curl up against me afterward, trace patterns on my chest while we talked about random stuff. She'd tell me about her childhood in Michigan, about her parents' messy divorce, about why she chose nonprofit work over making real money in the private sector. I felt like I was getting to know the real her, layer by layer. After about 3 months, I started thinking long-term. Like seriously long-term. I hadn't felt this connected to someone since college. Maybe ever. She was smart and funny and gorgeous, but more than that, she felt like someone I could build a life with. Someone who'd be a real partner, not just a girlfriend who happened to stick around. That's when I started noticing the weird scheduling thing. Every weekend, she'd have these family obligations. Her parents lived about 2 hours away, and she was always driving up there for birthday parties or family dinners or helping her mom with a project. Which was sweet, actually. I liked that she was close with her family, that she prioritized those relationships. But it was always Saturday into Sunday, and she never invited me along. When I'd suggest maybe meeting her parents or joining her for one of these family gatherings, she'd get this look, not exactly uncomfortable, but like she needed to think about it. She'd say something about wanting to keep things separate for now, that her family was complicated and she didn't want to subject me to their drama yet. I let it slide because everything else was so good. Some people are private about their families, right? And honestly, I wasn't in any rush to spend weekends making small talk with her relatives. I had plenty of stuff to keep me busy, working on my truck, helping my buddy renovate his kitchen, catching up on projects around my own place. I respected her boundaries. Some people compartmentalize their lives, keep work separate from personal time, family separate from dating. I figured as we got more serious, she'd start opening up those different parts of her life to me. By month 4, I was ready to take things to the next level. Not marriage necessarily, but definitely exclusivity if we weren't already there, maybe talking about moving in together eventually. I've been thinking about it for weeks, imagining how great it would be to wake up next to her every morning, to build something real together. I brought it up over dinner at our Thursday place. Told her I was falling hard, that I wanted to make this official if she was feeling the same way. The look on her face when I said it. I should have paid more attention to that look. It wasn't happiness exactly, more like panic trying to disguise itself as surprise. She said she was feeling the same way, that she was crazy about me too, but maybe we should take things slow. Make sure we were really compatible before making any big decisions. Which made sense, I guess. Better to be careful than rush into something and mess it up. But that conversation planted this seed in my brain. Started making me notice things I'd been overlooking before.
When Derek started talking about making things official, about maybe moving in together eventually, I was shocked back into reality. I wanted to wake up next to him every morning and cook dinner together every night and meet his friends and have him meet my parents for real, not as some fictional version of myself. But there was still Jeff. Always Jeff, sitting in the back of my mind like this low-level headache I couldn't quite shake. Our therapy sessions had actually been going better lately. We'd had 3 good weeks in a row, which hadn't happened in over a year. Dr. Peterson said we were making real progress on our communication patterns, that she was seeing genuine effort from both sides to understand each other's perspectives instead of just defending our own positions. And then there was Derek, who made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. With Jeff, even during our good periods, everything felt so careful and managed, like we were both walking on eggshells trying not to trigger whatever fight we'd had last time. With Derek, I could just be myself, the version of myself I liked best anyway. The problem was, living with Derek would complicate everything with Jeff. If we reconciled, how would I explain having lived with someone else during our separation? And from a legal standpoint, cohabitation with a new partner while technically still married could affect property division in a divorce. My lawyer friend, Jenny, had mentioned that once, in passing, and it had stuck in my brain like a warning bell. I started having these elaborate fantasies about somehow having both lives simultaneously. Like maybe Jeff and I would realize we were better as friends and could have some kind of amicable co-parenting arrangement for the dog we'd adopted together. Maybe Derek would be understanding about the complicated transition period and wouldn't need to know all the messy details of how I'd gotten from married to single. But every time Derek looked at me with those trusting brown eyes, every time he talked about his 5-year plan, or mentioned wanting to introduce me to his sister who was visiting next month, I felt this crushing weight of what I was doing to him. He thought he was falling in love with someone who was emotionally available, someone whose biggest complication was being a little private about her family. The worst part was that I was falling in love with him too. Real love, not just the excitement of something new and different. I loved the way he listened when I talked about work, how he remembered little details about stories I told him weeks earlier. I loved watching him concentrate when he was fixing something, the way his whole face would change when he was problem-solving. I loved how safe I felt when he held me, like nothing bad could touch us. But I also couldn't let go of the 12 years with Jeff. That's more than a third of my adult life we built together. Our shared friends, our shared history, the way he knew exactly how I like my coffee, and that I got anxiety attacks during thunderstorms and needed to sleep with the fan on even in winter. What if Derek and I were just the honeymoon phase talking? What if 6 months from now, we'd settle into the same patterns of irritation and taking each other for granted that had killed my marriage? At least with Jeff, I knew what I was getting. We'd done the work in therapy, identified our problems, developed strategies for managing them. That had to count for something. So when Derek brought up moving in together, I panicked. Told him I wanted to take things slow, that I believed in being really sure before making big commitments. Which wasn't entirely a lie, I did want to be sure. I just couldn't tell him that being sure meant choosing between him and a marriage I still wasn't ready to officially end. The pressure of managing both relationships started getting to me around month 5. Like I was cheating on both of them, even though technically I wasn't cheating on either of them. That's when I realized I had to tell Derek something. Not everything, but enough to buy myself more time to figure out what I actually wanted.
The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in February. We were at my place, and I was cooking dinner while Violet sat at my kitchen counter, supposedly working on some grant application on her laptop. But she kept staring at her phone, getting these texts that made her face do that thing again, that shift into some other mental space I wasn't part of. I've been thinking all week about bringing up the moving in together thing again. It had been almost 2 months since our first conversation about it, and nothing had really progressed. We were still doing the same Thursday evening, Sunday afternoon routine, still hadn't met each other's friends or family, still felt like we were playing house instead of actually building something real. I was chopping onions when I heard her sigh really heavily behind me. When I turned around, she was staring at her phone with this expression I'd never seen before. Not sad exactly, but like she was carrying something really heavy and didn't know where to put it down. I asked if everything was okay, and instead of her usual just work stuff or family drama, she looked at me for a long moment and said we needed to talk about something. The way she said it made my stomach drop. You know that tone. It's never good news when someone needs to talk about something. She closed her laptop and asked if I could sit down for a minute. I turned off the stove and sat across from her at my kitchen table, trying to read her face and coming up empty. She told me she hadn't been completely honest about her situation, that she was technically still married, but separated and working things out in therapy with her husband. She said the marriage had been over emotionally for a long time, that they were just trying to figure out the logistics of ending things in the healthiest way possible. I just froze, man, staring at her. All those weekend family obligations suddenly made perfect sense. All those phone calls she wouldn't answer in front of me. The way she'd never invited me to her apartment on Saturdays, always had somewhere else she needed to be. She kept talking, explaining how the separation was real, how she and this Jeff guy were living completely separate lives and just meeting for therapy to work through their issues before filing for divorce. She said she hadn't told me because she knew how complicated it sounded, but that her feelings for me were completely real and separate from whatever was happening with her marriage. The whole time she was talking, I was doing this mental inventory of our entire relationship. Every conversation we'd had about past relationships where she talked about her ex in past tense. Every time I'd mentioned wanting to meet her friends or family, and she'd deflected. Every time she'd seem surprised when I talked about future plans, like she couldn't quite picture herself in the scenarios I was describing. When she finished explaining, she reached across the table like she wanted to take my hand, and I pulled back without thinking about it. Asked her how long she'd been planning to tell me this, whether there was anything else I should know about her situation. She said she'd been trying to figure out how to bring it up for weeks, that she knew it was complicated, but that it didn't change how she felt about me. That the marriage was over in every way that mattered, and the therapy was just about closure and figuring out practical stuff like dividing assets. But I kept thinking about all those nights she'd leave my place and go home to her apartment. All those Saturdays she was unavailable. If she was really separated, if the marriage was really over, why was she still going to couples therapy? Why hadn't she just filed for divorce already? I asked her those questions directly, and she got defensive. Started explaining about how complicated divorce is when you've been married for 12 years, about wanting to handle things maturely and responsibly. But the more she talked, the more I realized she was still trying to manage the narrative instead of just telling me the truth. That's when it hit me that I needed to talk to this Jeff guy myself. Not to cause drama or try to blow up the therapy process, but because I deserved to know what was actually going on. If Violet was being honest about the separation, if they really were just working through divorce logistics, then he'd confirm that. But if there was more to the story, I needed to know before I wasted any more time on something that was never going to work. I didn't tell Violet what I was planning to do. After she left that night, I spent about 2 hours on Facebook and LinkedIn until I found Jeff Doyle, married to Violet Patterson, works in finance downtown. I sent him a message explaining who I was and asking if we could grab coffee to talk about Violet. He responded within an hour. Said he'd been wondering when someone from her other life would reach out. Her other life. Jesus Christ.
I knew it was over the moment Jeff texted me asking if we could move our therapy appointment to Friday because he was meeting someone for coffee on Tuesday who wanted to talk about me. He said the person's name was Derek. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type back asking what he meant, what Derek could possibly want to discuss with him. But I already knew. Derek had done exactly what I would have done in his position, gone straight to the source to figure out what was really going on. Jeff called me instead of texting back. His voice was calm in that way it gets when he's really angry but trying not to show it. He said Derek had been very respectful in his message, that he'd explained they'd been dating for 5 months and wanted to understand the situation better before continuing the relationship. 5 months? Hearing Jeff say it out loud made me realize how long I'd been lying to both of them. To Derek about being single, to Jeff about just needing space to think. To myself about what I was actually doing. Jeff asked if I'd been planning to mention that I was in a serious relationship with someone else, or if I was just going to keep showing up to couples therapy pretending we were working toward reconciliation while I was building a life with another man. I tried to explain that it wasn't like that the separation meant we were both free to explore other relationships while we figured things out. But even as I said it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. You don't go to couples therapy for 5 months while secretly dating someone else and pretend you're working on your marriage in good faith. Jeff said he was done. Not just with therapy, but with all of it. He'd be filing for divorce next week. He said he respected the separation because he thought it was about giving each other space to work on our individual issues, not about me shopping for a replacement husband while keeping him as backup. The worst part was that he wasn't even angry, not really. He sounded disappointed, which was somehow much worse. Like he'd expected better from me, and I had confirmed his lowest opinion of who I'd become. I tried calling Derek immediately after Jeff hung up, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting him, asking if we could talk before he met with Jeff, if I could explain everything properly. The message showed as delivered, but he never responded. I spent the next 3 days in this horrible limbo, checking my phone constantly for messages from either of them, trying to figure out what I was going to say when Derek finally called me back. I practiced different versions of the conversation in my head, how I'd explained that my feelings for him were real, that I'd just gotten overwhelmed by the complexity of ending a 12-year marriage and had handled everything badly. But Derek never called. Jeff texted me Friday afternoon to say they'd had their coffee meeting and that Derek seemed like a decent guy who deserved better than what I'd been putting him through. He said Derek had asked him not to share the details of their conversation, but that I should know Derek wouldn't be contacting me again. I tried calling Derek one more time that evening, and his number was blocked. Completely blocked. Like I'd never existed in his life at all. That's when it really hit me what I'd done. I'd been so focused on keeping both options open that I'd sabotaged both relationships completely. Jeff was filing for divorce and wanted nothing to do with reconciliation anymore. Derek was gone, and I couldn't even apologize or try to make things right because he'd cut off all contact. For 5 months, I'd convinced myself I was being smart by keeping my options open, that I was protecting myself from making the wrong choice by refusing to make any choice at all. But all I'd really done was prove to both of them that I couldn't be trusted to be honest about what I wanted or needed. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later. Jeff had included a note saying he hoped I'd figure out how to be more honest with the next person, that we'd both wasted enough time pretending our marriage could survive my inability to commit to working on it. I wanted to be angry with him, to argue that separation meant we were both free to date other people, that I hadn't technically cheated on anyone. But sitting there with those papers in my hands, I finally understood what I'd really been doing. And now I was alone with the consequences of that choice, which turned out to be no choice, which turned out to be the worst choice of all.